Ei você, sabia que Era de Ultron era pra ser totalmente diferente? E aí rapaziada, tudo bem? Sejam muito bem-vindos para mais um vídeo desse belíssimo canal, o meu canal favorito, né? Esse canal é o meu canal favorito. E o meu segundo canal favorito é meu canal secundário, tá rapaziada? Com toda a humildade do mundo. Enfim, The Original Plans of Avengers Age of Ultron é o vídeo do canal Bullets and Blockbusters que a gente vai reagir aqui. Então bora lá, rapaziada.
When Spider-Man were introduced in Age of Ultron. Not only that, but in the third act, what of...
Como é que o volume tá baixo pra mim? Perfeito. Agora sim. Deixa eu voltar.
What if Captain Marvel and Spider-Man were introduced in Age of Ultron? Not only that, but in the
Capitã
third act,
Marvel e
what if
Homem-Aranha?
Silver survived to become a core Avenger, and the thousands of Ultron bots fused together
Caraca, o Mercúrio sobrevivesse?
into one towering, monstrous
Nossa, velhas. Ah, mano, por que não fizeram
Ultron.
isso?
Believe it or not, all of these things almost happened.
Quer dizer, eu acho que o Homem-Aranha não ia gostar. Não ia gostar do Homem-Aranha introduzido em Era de Ultron. Mas, mano, o resto, essa cena aí dos Ultron Bots se reunindo, o Mercúrio sobrevivendo, a Capitã Marvel introduzida lá. Nossa, isso sim, isso é absoluto cinema.
Happened. So let's dive in and find out what happened behind the scenes to arrive at the movie we got, and also take a look at what could have been Age of Ultron. Originally, Quicksilver wasn't supposed to die. Whedon had planned for the character to survive the film's climax, and even shot a scene of him being revived using the tissue regeneration machine that saves Clint earlier in the movie.
Ué, por que tiraram isso?
He was also originally included alongside a sister in the final scene of the film, featuring Cap and Natasha addressing the new Avengers. And while it's been speculated that the decision was always to kill off the character, with these cutscenes only shot to prevent fans from spoiling the real ending should anything leak, that may not be entirely true. A year before the film came out saw the release of X-Men Days of Future Past, which featured a wildly popular version of the same character played by Evan Peters. The slow-motion sequence of him zipping around a kitchen to the tune Time in a Bottle, while casually dismantling a room full of guards, instantly became the standout moment of the film, and made the character a fan favorite. Compared to that, Aaron Taylor Johnson's take on the character felt more grounded and less visually inventive, which may have left Whedon and Marvel feeling like they couldn't compete, and thus decided to kill him off. Additionally, Whedon wanted...
Cara, se fosse pra matar alguém nesse filme... Mano, matava o Mercúrio. Eu acho que tá certo, sabe? Ah, era um personagem com potencial, mas tinha isso, né? Que não era o favorito dos fãs, porque o favorito mesmo era o dos X-Men. E, poxa, não dá pra matar Capitão América, nem Hulk, nem Homem de Ferro, nem Thor. A Wanda, eu acho que ela tinha mais potencial que o Mercúrio na época, e realmente isso foi comprovado. Daí tem a Viúva Negra, o Visão e o Gavião Arqueiro. O Visão chegou nesse filme e é um personagem muito legal, que dava pra desenvolver arco com a Feiticeira Escarlate, que foi desenvolvido, então eu não mataria ele também. Viúva Negra tava pra ser desenvolvida também, apesar de não ter sido muito mais desenvolvida, além de Era de Ultron, então eu também não mataria ela. E o Gavião Arqueiro, cara, eu não sei, tipo... Entre ele e o Mercúrio, podia ser, né? Podia ser o Gavião Arqueiro, dar um peso a mais pra história. Eu acho que o Gavião Arqueiro, na verdade, devia ter morrido no CM. Podia ter morrido em Ultimato, se sacrificando. Eu não sei, podia ter morrido em Hawkeye. Daí ia mudar o tom da série, mas tudo bem. Eu acho que a hora dele já passou, do Jeremy Renner. Mas, do mesmo jeito, eu acho que a melhor escolha em Era de Ultron seria matar o Mercúrio mesmo.
to subvert expectations and surprise audiences. Hawkeye had been heavily foreshadowed as a potential casualty, as the character had been given a surprising amount of screen time, a newly revealed family, and several moments that felt like a...
Mano, era um cenário perfeito pra matar o Gavião Arqueiro. Ele tinha acabado de apresentar uma família. Tipo, pô, o peso que ia ter na história, mano, era a hora certa, velho.
farewell, making his survival seem unlikely. But Whedon did this on purpose to misdirect the audience, as he felt they wouldn't fully expect a newly introduced character like Quicksilver to bite the dust so soon. Captain Marvel, who was eventually teased at the end of Infinity War before being introduced in her own prequel film, originally was going to appear at the end of Ultron as part of the new Avengers scene. However, Feige vetoed it, worried that audiences wouldn't know who she was. Plus, he was reluctant to introduce her fully formed, flying in costume before you knew who she was or how she came to get her powers.
Cara, eu acho que, tipo, o Kevin Feige vetou porque não iam saber quem é a Capitã Marvel. Legal. E eu acho que o modo certo de introduzir ela seria durante o filme mesmo. Ah, daí ia ficar com muito personagem. Concordo. Mas se for pra colocar só na última ceninha também, aí não dá, né? Então... Cara, é difícil. Eu não colocaria a Capitã Marvel no filme, por causa que, pô, só a cena pós-créditos, apesar de ela entrar e daí poder ter o filme dela antes, isso ia ser legal. Mas, pô, só a cena pós-créditos. Além disso, ela já ia ter que ficar presa aos Vingadores, daí ia ter que ser um prequel dos anos 90 de novo, provavelmente ia ser o mesmo filme e ia ser uma atriz diferente, mas eu não colocaria.
And shot the scene with a stand-in, but after Feige nixed the cameo, they ended up repurposing the same shot with Wanda instead. Whedon also hoped to include Spider-Man in the scene, especially since Sony had recently approached Marvel about collaborating on the character, but despite
mas eles ainda não estavam tão próximos assim nessa época, né?
early talks, the legal and licensing complications hadn't been resolved yet,
Aí.
and the deal to bring Spider-Man into the MCU wouldn't be finalized until after Ultron was finished, making his inclusion impossible. One of the central emotional threads in Age of Ultron is the potential romance between Bruce Banner and Natasha Romanoff, marked by their growing connection and mutual flirtation. Originally, the answer to their will they or won't they tension came much earlier in the film. In the original cut, the bedroom scene on the Clint family farmhouse featured Banner rejecting Natasha outright, a moment that Whedon felt was some of the most beautiful stuff in the film. However, Marvel suggested postponing the moment until the film's conclusion, believing that delaying the resolution would make Hulk's final decision to leave in the Quinjet more emotionally impactful. Whedon reluctantly agreed and reshot the scene to reflect the change, even though Scarlett Johansson had been playing her character as if Bruce had already rejected her in later scenes, forcing Whedon to reshoot those too. In hindsight, Whedon admitted that Marvel made the right call. The later breakup hits harder, but the relationship still suffered from a lack of clear build-up, even though Whedon would later say, "It made perfect sense to me, even if it doesn't make perfect sense to everybody on Twitter. They're outsiders in completely different ways that match up really well." However, Hulk's story was originally meant to end with them flying the Quinjet into deep space, with a signal later detected near Saturn, a clear setup for a potential Planet Hulk film. Whedon specifically...
Mano, por que a gente não teve o filme do Planeta Hulk? Eu sei que foi adaptado no filme do Thor, mas, pô, cara, um Planeta Hulk, daí depois um Hulk contra o mundo, nossa, cara, ia ser perfeito. Mano, daria tudo pra assistir um filme desse.
Put in the line, "Where in the world am I not a threat?" as he wanted to leave audiences with the idea that if this is the last movie, that Hulk may have left the world behind, which Whedon felt was enormously poetic, but Feige pushed back, since Marvel had no plans for a Planet Hulk film. As a result, Whedon was forced to revise the ending, keeping the jet's trajectory within Earth's atmosphere, much to Whedon's annoyance. Ironically, when Thor Ragnarok entered development a year later, a conversation between Feige and executive producer Brad Winderbaum led to the decision to include Hulk in that film, effectively incorporating elements of Planet Hulk after all. Feige even joked that the film was briefly referred to as Planet Thor. Reflecting on the shift, Feige recalled turning to his team and saying, "You know what that means? That means Hulk went to space at the end of Age of Ultron." Realizing the irony, he had to circle back to Whedon and deliver the news. "Josh, guess where Hulk's going?" Whedon's deadpan reply said it all. He's going to space. During the Hulkbuster sequence, Whedon originally planned for Hulk to turn gray while under Wanda's spell, symbolizing a more savage, uncontrollable, berserker version of the character. The idea was to visually distinguish this rampaging Hulk from his usual self, emphasizing just how deeply Wanda had manipulated his mind. However, Whedon ultimately backed off the concept, concerned that a sudden shift in Hulk's color might confuse audiences unfamiliar with the comics. Instead, they kept his iconic green hue, but desaturated it and gave him bloodshot eyes. It showed his loss of control without altering his appearance too drastically. One of the most contentious and ultimately compromised sequences in Age of Ultron was Thor's mysterious cave vision. Originally, the scene saw Thor immerse himself in a mystical pool, allowing the Norn to possess his body and speak through him, while Eric stood by asking questions. Through this possession, Thor would gain crucial knowledge about the Infinity Stones, Ultron's growing threat, and his own destiny. However, the scene didn't test well with test audiences, who found it confusing, especially without finished visual effects. Additionally, Whedon worried that this sort of mystical sequence would work well in a Thor movie, but might feel out of place in the Avengers. According to Whedon, this is when things got very unpleasant with Marvel, as he fought to keep both this sequence and Barton's farm. Eventually, he got to keep the farm, but was so beaten down from arguing that he reluctantly agreed to cut the entire cave scene and just have Thor return later and reveal what he had learned. However, his editors insisted they had to show some of the cave, resulting in it turning more into a vision/nightmare. To walk Thor through his vision, Whedon wanted Loki, but Marvel couldn't make a deal with Tom Hiddleston, so they got Idris Elba instead. Undeterred, Whedon went straight to Hiddleston and asked him to do it, resulting in him agreeing, and Whedon now having access to both actors for the sequence. That version had a reference to the fact that Loki is now on the Asgard throne, as Thor would ask his brother what their father would say, resulting in Loki doing an Odin impression, which Whedon intended to be Thor's subconscious telling him that Loki was literally imitating his father on Asgard, which would be revealed in Ragnarok. However, test audiences overemphasized Loki's role, and thought that because he was in the film that he was controlling Ultron, resulting in him being cut from the movie. What remained in the final cut was a shadow of what Whedon had intended, a symbolic, visually rich sequence meant to tie together cosmic threads, now diluted by studio compromises and misread audience reactions. During early development of Vision's birth scene, Whedon pushed for the character's design to include visible genitals, believing it would make the moment feel more raw and organic, like a true artificial life form being born. He demanded that the concept artist create multiple renditions of Vision's appearance,
Nossa, ia ficar muito legal aquele ali que
featuring
passou.
different anatomical options. But after seeing the concept art, Whedon quickly reconsidered and said, yeah, I'm 100% wrong here. I don't need to see any of this. Before the final battle, a scene was cut from the film that showed Captain America encountering graffiti that depicted his face alongside the word fascista. The moment was meant to be a quiet but powerful reflection on how he was perceived, not as a hero, but as a symbol of foreign power and control. Seeing it shook him, forcing him to reconsider how his image, particularly his militaristic appearance, might unintentionally instill fear in the very people he was trying to protect. This moment led him to remove his helmet for the final battle, hoping that presenting himself more vulnerably would help humanize him in the eyes of the civilians. It wasn't just about the Maximoff's hatred of the Avengers, it was a reminder that the entire country had begun to turn against him, and Steve was grappling with the weight of that growing disgust. During the early stages of development, Whedon explored the idea of a towering Mega Ultron constructed from thousands of smaller Ultron bots fused together into a single monstrous entity. Visually, it would have been a striking and intimidating centerpiece for the final battle, an ultimate evolution of the villain that symbolized his quest for perfection and domination. But while the image was undeniably cool, it didn't make much practical sense within the story. The sheer number of bots required to form such a creature likely exceeded what Ultron could realistically produce. As a result, the concept was scratched early on, in favor of the more chaotic and fast-paced battle against a hive-like army of drones. When Whedon watches the first Avengers film, all he sees are flaws, which is the reason he wanted to make Age of Ultron, in order to make one that was better and be able to up his game. But that ambition came at a cost. Age of Ultron was a more complex, thematically dense, and narratively burdened film, and Whedon poured everything into it, only to feel, in the end, like he had been punished for trying to make something great. The pressure he placed on himself, combined with Marvel's rigorous, sometimes stifling creative oversight, left him creatively and emotionally drained. Tasked with juggling a sprawling cast of characters, introducing a new generation of heroes and villains, and laying the groundwork for Marvel's future films, Whedon found himself caught between his creative instincts and the demands of a larger cinematic machine. He described the process as filled with friction, a constant push and pull between his vision and the studio's roadmap for the MCU. By the time it was over, Whedon was burnt out, admitting he was completely tapped when Marvel came to him to write Infinity War. In the end, Age of Ultron was a production defined by exhaustion, compromise, and creative clashes with Marvel, an experience that would ultimately mark the end of Whedon's time with the franchise. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't...
Legal. Bom, rapaziada, esse foi o vídeo de hoje. Espero que vocês tenham gostado. Dá like, se inscreve. Eu sei que é chato, mas eu peço do mesmo jeito. E, rapaziada, link do vídeo que eu assisti do meu canal secundário tá na descrição. Aqui tá um vídeo que o YouTube acha que você vai gostar e aqui tá a pelota do meu canal. É isso aí, valeu, falou e tchau, tchau. Até a próxima, rapaziada. Fui!